I'm so excited to welcome Bob. He has not only experience with AI, but more importantly, I think experience with organizations and change management and leadership. And what I've seen is that, AI helps you deepen your expertise that already exists, right? So if you're Beth and you're really good at social media or marketing, or you're Carla and you're really amazing at integrating change and technology into a business, or you're Steed and you're great at helping educational facilities in Africa. Good to see you, Steed. AI will just help you do that even faster and better. And I think what's happening is it's changing how businesses are thinking about who to hire, who does what role, how they, manage. And for folks like Gary who are working with businesses who are going through change, I think Bob will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience. So let's turn it over to the man, the myth, the legend, bringing years of experience in a variety of situations that he may speak to. Bob, welcome to the virtual stage. Great to have you.
Thanks so much. Hey, everybody. I guess first off, there's a question is anybody, so my work is really focused a lot on sort of, let's call it mid-size, the mid-market businesses probably earning somewhere between, say, 50 million and a billion a year, something in that range. And usually like at least 100 employees, and we top out at about 5,000 employees. Is anybody in a business in that range, or do they touch businesses in that range? Scott, before we get started, I would just kind of love to know, like, who's in the room? Hey, Josh, great. Cool. So just know that that's who my remarks are kind of aimed at. But we'll modify along the way too. So anyway, hi everybody. Yeah, as Scott mentioned, I have been, it's a little embarrassing, I guess, or it's going to date me a bit, but I have been in operations and organization design for actually like 30 years. As I was writing this talk, I was just counting back and I was like, yeah, my first real job was in 1995. I'll actually tell you about that in a little bit during the course of this, but I have seen a lot of organization charts, in this time period, and every single one of them has had lies in it or been a lie itself, right? And I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it's necessarily malicious. But I do think it's a kind of lie that's becoming really more and more consequential and more dangerous, by the day. And in the next 45 minutes or so, I kind of hope to convince you of that. And we'll also give you a path forward. And we'll also be discussing sort of how AI can help, I believe, and sort of what we're building. So first off, since you're in this talk, oh, sorry, I probably should share my screen, right? Shouldn't it? The whole thing. I think this is the one that's the least complicated. Can everybody see my screen now? Yeah, we're good. Now I have to pull this up.
Looks great.
All right, cool. Thanks. Great. So yeah, so I guess I just want to ask this question. Maybe we can drop it into chat. We can do a little waterfall thing in chat. Is, since you're here, I'm assuming this might have resonated with you, this idea that org charts lie. So how do they lie? What lies do org charts tell in your experience? And I would love to see that in the chat. Yeah, never up to date. Roles and responsibilities. People do things that aren't in their role. Yeah, of course. That's a great one. Yeah. Cross-functional responsibilities. That's one of my favorites. How to layer within teams and AI systems. Okay, yeah. So that, yeah. Here we go. All right, you can't see the context. All right, you all get an A+. There are 3 flaws as far as I see them, and I think everything you've mentioned, kind of fits into with these, right? So an org chart is going to be inaccurate. It's always inaccurate because it's a static artifact, for one, right? So as soon as you print it, it's out of date. It's often the first thing I ask for when I go into organizations, because I've been, working in change, organizational change for a long time. I'll go in and I'll say, how does things work around here? They'll show me an org chart, or worse, they'll say, give us a week to update the org chart and we'll get it to you, because it's just sort of like this weird artifact that no one actually ever really refers to. And then there's also all of these sort of like dotted line relationships. There's inevitably like one person who actually is sitting in 3 different roles, but they're only in one role on this sheet. I've even seen org charts where like entire departments or divisions are just sort of edited out because they're not like core functions. They're like, oh, it's just these people over here, and they just kind of like toss it over the wall. The other thing is, and that's kind of incompleteness, but also I think there's another kind of incompleteness, which is more serious, right? Is that they show only, we think that they're a picture of an organization, but really they're only showing you like couple of things. Generally speaking, when I look at an org chart, all I really know is the people at the top probably get paid more than the people at the bottom, and the people at the top probably have more power or more ability to make decisions than the people at the bottom, even though that's not always true, right? I mean, I think we've all been in an organization where there's like one guy who has the power to make all the decisions and can overrule all the decisions. And they're usually at the top of the org chart. But then below that is just everybody else is kind of like being blown around by that person's whims. And this leads to me to be, I think, the biggest lie and the most consequential lie. And the reason I'm kind of focused on this right now is that they create this kind of false mental model of what an organization is, right? We see this structure, we see this static thing, and we begin to think that our organization is going to be kind of like a machine, right? That it's going to or a building, right? And all we need to do in order to change the behavior or the performance of this organization is begin to move people around. Oh, this person is a bad, we have a bad part here. Let's swap that bad part out, put a good part in, or let's move this around, like put this person in charge of things because they know how to get things done. But really, an organization, to my way of thinking, is a lot more like a forest or an ecosystem than it is like a building or a car, right? And so that leads us to we end up with this kind of like faulty mental model. And as we're moving into the times we're in right now, I think we need to have pretty accurate mental models because our operating model is going to have to match our operating context, right? Like if you have a boat, but you don't have any water, the boat's very useful in one context and not useful in another context. And so the metaphor I would use for organizations is organizations, the way they operate is useful for context which is rapidly disappearing and is not useful for the context that we're moving into. And I think we're running into some potentially pretty serious trouble. The way I think about it is we are beginning to experience a state change. If you're familiar with, just basic Newtonian physics, right? Like that we have different states of matter, right? We have liquid, we have gas, we have plasma, we have solid, right? And the way I think about it is that our market or our context, our operating context, our global operating context has been heating up for a long time. Like I say, I've been in business for about 30 years. I've seen a ton of change. And I've worked in, digital products for a long time. I worked in publishing for a long time. And I've worked in a variety of other industries as well. But we've seen this sort of change like slowly heating up. We've been talking about business agility for well over a decade. We've been talking about resilience for well over a decade. We've been talking about the need to update our operating models and our operating OS for quite some time. But I think now we're experiencing a world, and I kind of love this picture, where AI is kind of hitting this already unstable environment. We're going to see the change happen much, much more rapidly, right? I don't know if you read Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises, but he's like, there are two ways to go broke, right? You go gradually and then suddenly. And I just think we're entering a time when, suddenly is going to be happening a lot more often to a lot more people. And I want to, leave you with or not leave you with, but bring up a few sort of scary stats, right? There's this Gallup poll from last year I found really interesting. It says 7 in 10 workers report disruptive change in their orgs, right? They just say, my org is going through some kind of disruptive change. And of that group of people within these organizations, the leaders are 56% more likely to be experiencing that change in their world, right? So the ICs, they may be experiencing change. Actually, we've mentioned, maybe it's layoffs. We heard about that during our intro, right? But like that is happening. Really, the change is just sort of like it's kind of again heating up at this sort of leadership level. And then this PricewaterhouseCoopers survey from this year, I think they talked about 5,000 different CEOs, and they found that 42% of them believe that their company is going to be viable, not even viable, without reinvention within the next 10 years. And I would love to kind of get that group together and say, well, what about the next 5 years? What about the next 3 years? Because I think 10 years is a pretty long time horizon. And I'd also like to find out if there are, this was, I think, their number one concern. It was 42% said this was their number one concern. But I think there's a whole host of people. So I think the majority of organizations probably see that some kind of reinvention needs to happen and needs to happen in relatively short order. And then this brings us to AI, the AI market, not necessarily what we're doing all here with AI, but the AI bubble or bubbles. If anybody saw this Fast Company article or saw the Bloomberg AI market sketch that went around, I think last week or in the last couple of weeks. But basically, they're pointing out that NVIDIA is driving everything. NVIDIA is investing in companies, and then those companies are spending that investment to buy NVIDIA chips. NVIDIA chips inevitably depreciate in value. They don't appreciate in value, they depreciate in value. And so we're getting, so it's starting to get some of the dynamics that aren't too dissimilar from the subprime mortgage crisis from 2008. But it's also creating a lot of opportunity in a lot of infrastructure, right? And what this Fast Company article pointed out is that we have kind of like three different bubbles, right? We have their valuations, right? The way NVIDIA is investing and OpenAI is investing and the way other people are investing. We are probably experiencing a little overvaluation. We're probably building too much capacity, right? We're probably, or, potentially anyway, because and maybe not, who knows, right? Like I'm not a fortune teller. But there's also, I think, in the people that I talk to, there's a ton of hype, right? And I have executives who are being told by their boards, hey, what are you doing about AI? What are you doing about AI? You have to invest in AI. And they're like, well, AI for what? Right? They're like asking like the next question down. It's like, what is AI actually going to be good for? It's just sort of like, I lived through the first .com boom, and it's not dissimilar, I guess, to what we experienced back then, where you put .com on the end of anything, and then all of a sudden you had a certain valuation, right? We saw, and I actually worked with pets.com. For those of you that remember, I worked for the agency that built their websites back in the day. So, I think that's where we're at. We're experiencing this sort of like rapid change within our operating context. And that means we're going to have to evolve our operating models as well. I've experienced this really firsthand. My first career, I mentioned, like I kind of started my career in 1995. I was a production manager for newspapers. If you all remember what those are, right? These, paper things that had news on them. I worked at both weekly newspapers and I was and did the daily newspapers. I finished that stage of my career at the San Francisco Examiner, where I was in charge of all design and all production for the entire newspaper. And during the time, this was 1995 till about 2003, and during that time, we saw massive revolutions in terms of technology. We saw desktop publishing. It was already sort of taking hold when I started, but then it really took hold. Like it really took over, and we were able to actually eventually, with a lot of work, send a file directly to our printer, and they were able to print that file directly onto a plate that they would then make the newspaper out of. And that was truly revolutionary for us. Because before that, I was actually carrying flats in a box in my crappy car out to the printer. And then they would shoot them on a camera. Then that camera would put them onto a plate, right? So we saw that revolution. We also saw digital photography take over. When I started, I had people shooting onto film. My sports photographers would go shoot onto film. We would come back. We'd have to rapidly develop that film. Then we'd have to scan that film. Then we have to bring it into, Photoshop, I think 1.0 or 2.0, and tweak it the way we could, get it onto the page, get it out, and then eventually began putting directly onto hard drive. And so each of these revolutions in technology forced me to update how we operated as a team. And now we're entering this world, I think, where it just doesn't happen periodically. It's not like every couple of years you have this big revolution. It's more like every couple of days you have this thing that you're like, hey, does this change things? Does this not change things? So our operating context is entering a world where it's always changing, which means our operating model is going to have to be adaptive. We're going to have to create more adaptive operating models. And then the org chart, it's just a placeholder for the problem, but like it's representative of the problem of a static organization design, when what we really need is an adaptive organization design. So the big question is how. The big question is, how do we create more adaptive organizations? And really, if you know complex adaptive systems and a few other, kind of pieces of organizational design, you know that there's sort of like three different levels at which we can change our organizational behavior. One thing I actually want to point out is that organizations, to my way of thinking, are non-linear systems. That means small changes can have big impact, big effort can have no impact. And then sometimes small changes have small impact and big changes have big impact, right? We don't really know ahead of time. And so if we're trying to change our system, we actually can kind of enter that change in a variety of places. We actually have choice about where we're going to enter that change. And the way I see it is, you can start at the person, right? You can change the mindset or the behavior of a key individual or two. You can work at the team level, where you change the makeup, the practices, the habits of the incentives, the tools, the processes, all the things that kind of like that the organization does that kind of cross the entire organization. And so I want to take a look at these kind of like one at a time, and I want to get your sort of thoughts on it and yeah, I want to kind of think together through it. So we're going to think through sort of each of these layers. So from an organizational adaptivity level, which is to my mind, the most important, right? This is kind of where I tend to spend most of my time. It's important to think of organizations as living systems, not machines, I always try to think of them as kind of like a garden that I'm cultivating, not like a machine that I'm going in and tinkering with. And I think the big insight that I've had in the last few years, the first book I wrote was all about operations. It was all about how to reorganize digital teams and, inside like large corporations. That was called Agile Business. That was my first book. I wrote that about 10 years ago, or actually more like 12 years ago now. And then my second book was called Radical Alignment, which was much more about sort of the cultural, emotional, conversational, relational pieces. And what I've become to really, really appreciate is that culture and operations are really two sides of the same coin, that we can't pay attention only to one without paying attention to the other. And as a matter of fact, I would really rather, and when I look back over my career, when I've worked with places that have really good culture where people trust each other, like each other, share information, work well together, I can fix the operations pretty easily, right? But on the other hand, if the culture is really messed up and the operations are really good, that organization is in deep trouble. It's really hard to fix that organization. It's really hard to affect change because cultural change is so much harder to impact. And then the two are highly related, right? If I have bad operations, I'm often going to have a bad culture because people are frustrated, walking, hating each other, right? And so I always try to look at these two things together. So which means that I often work with both chief operating officers and chief people officers and, team leaders, like, so all the people who are responsible for all these things. So the rules of thumb I would have is we want to align operations and culture as one system. We want to make our feedback loops. If you know your lean theory, right, we want to have good feedback loops that are visible, actionable, where information is flowing smoothly through the system. And we want to design so the organization gets better over time. So it learns and adapts and gets better over time. So I'd like to ask just a quick question to you all, right? And maybe you can think about it for a minute and then you come back and give me your answers. I just love to sort of like crowdsource some data for myself here. Is where does your system set your people up to fail, right? Like, so, or if you don't work in a system currently, maybe think back to a previous one, but where have you seen organizational systems set up people to actually fail within that system? You might ask the sort of the sub question there is where do the stated values and daily practices diverge, right? We're all a family here, but do it my way, right? That kind of thing, right? So sometimes you'll have these like lofty stated values. And then what's one operational shift that you think could close a gap between values and daily practices? So let's just why don't we do this? I'm going to set a timer. Let's just take 1 minute, kind of think through this, and then we'll come back and just have a quick conversation. But I'm kind of curious what you come up with, but maybe, just take a minute and we'll come back. All right, we're a small group. Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks. Thanks for putting it in the chat. But since we're a small group, why don't we just feel free to take yourself off mute and tell me what came up as you thought through.
Maybe to start out, Bob, I was thinking about, larger organizations like you're speaking to. A lot of times the expectations that either a department head or an executive team have for the organization are not aligned with the operational folks. And it takes a long time for that information to flow down to the day-to-day, workers. So, I think that's one big one, in large organizations, it's kind of the speed of change
Mhm.
that the executive team has all these expectations, but how do you effectively get that down to the rest of the organization?
Is that also like, Gary, is that kind of like strategy as well? Like who is our customer and what are we doing for them? Is it that kind of basic level knowledge?
It absolutely could be. Yes. Yeah. Who are we? And, why are we different? You've got the executive team thinking about business growth, and, you've got the folks in the trenches maybe saying, why would we go that direction? Our systems aren't even set up for that. So yeah, that misalignment, I think, happens a lot in large organizations.
You're reminding me of a CEO I worked for a company that went under about 15 years ago. And he would to the development team who I was responsible for. I was a product manager in this particular org. And he said, we have a beautiful face. And he kept talking about our butt, meaning like the parts that you can't see. He's like, that can be really messy. And so basically it was like our database engineers saying, your stuff can be crap as long as we look good on the front. And, I think people walked out of that meeting and quit their job, the ones that could leave kind of like left, right. So.
Yeah. I also think about it like a ship, right? A ship in the ocean, it doesn't turn on a dime. And you've got to think ahead as the captain of where you're going and what that trajectory needs to look like.
Yeah.
And when an executive starts to think too short term, that causes problems. That causes, missed direction, mishaps, collisions, etc.
Great. Anybody else? I noticed a couple of people put things in the chat. Iteration cycles between BUs are always a chokehold. Can you say more about that, Josh? I'm curious. Yeah. I think I get what you mean.
Yeah, it's just a translation piece. So, I mean, the way sales interprets an issue is needing engineering. They're coming to engineering speaking sales.
Mhm.
And so engineering does their best first attempt, comes to sales, and it's usually back and forth. It takes, at best days, usually weeks, at worst a month before you get to where you need to be. And that's really across so many different business units because they're just, I mean, I know it sounds silly, but they're kind of speaking different languages. Their thought process is different, And so the orchestration layer between all of these business units is where we've had the most success in AI, and just building agents where you can basically, if you're in sales and you need some sort of engineering help, you can model it with AI as if you're speaking to an engineer. And then by the time you get to the engineer, hopefully your iteration cycles have been dramatically reduced. And so that's just kind of one of the things that we've seen.
Interesting. Do you follow David Bland at all? Do you know David J. Bland? Yeah.
The name sounds familiar. I can't see off the top of my head.
He's an old friend and but what did he invented some kind of mapping process. I can't quite remember, something that we've used a lot for a long time and for product management. But he's been doing a lot recently with building libraries of experiments that product teams can run, basically because AI is kind of like saying, run a focus group with 20 people. And he's like, no, that does, we know that doesn't work, or we know that we don't have the capacity to do that. So he's kind of building up a library, then he's using AI in order to kind of feed that out. You might be interested in his work. I think what he's doing is fascinating. And that really it brings me, so this is a kind of exercise that I frequently do with executives when I work with them, is we start to think through and basically what we're looking for is bottlenecks in the system. We're looking for places where things are getting stuck where they shouldn't get stuck, or where disconnects are happening. And then what I always encourage them to do is to run some experiments. Again, I come from a lean background, an agile background. I have a quote from Deming. Everybody does Deming's work. Are people familiar with Deming? Yeah. So Deming really, he would have not liked this, but people say that he was responsible for the post-war boom in Japan. So basically, it's his work that all of lean manufacturing, the Toyota production system is based on it, and most of lean manufacturing is based on it. And his work is amazing. I understand about 10% of it when I read it because it's so dense. But one of the quotes that I always come back to is that a bad system is going to beat a good person every time. Meaning, not that a bad system is going to, well, I guess it does mean a bad system is going to win, but it means we're all going to lose because the bad system, like a very, very well-intentioned person in a bad system is not going to beat that system. The system is going, the system is going to tear them down. Let's move on to the team level stuff. And this is where actually, to a lot of work, I work with a lot of leadership teams. That's really been my bread and butter for a long time. And the reason to work with leadership teams is that I believe that leadership teams are the ones that set the tone for the rest of the organization. They set the frequency that we all have to harmonize to. And so a few years ago, I was working for PG&E on the West Coast. We were working with like a 4,000 person technology team and trying to align with their business units. And then we eventually found out that two people very at the top in the C-suite disliked each other, couldn't talk to each other, and couldn't agree on things. And then they were telling their people opposite things. And then that was amplifying down the system. And then we were all, kind of, there was no fixing to be done. So I'd like to start with leadership teams, but even if I'm not starting with the leadership team, I do like to start with teamwork, because good work gets done, in my experience, with cross-functional teams. So, and it's where, as I say here, like it's where culture becomes visible. So 3 rules of thumb: we want to align around a shared mission. We want to be really explicit and honest about roles and responsibilities and decision rights, because I've been parts of teams where everybody says, hey, again, we're all a family here, or we're all just like collaborating, but really we all know that what one person says is what's going to go. I'm fine with that as long as we're really explicit about that, right? And so I often work with teams to kind of help them become very, very explicit about their decision rights. And then the last one to me, and this used to be a personal preference, and now I think it's a business necessity, right, is that we have to trust each other. That means we have to get rid of the jerks, right? This comes from, what is it? I think Reid Hoffman. No, this is from Netflix. All right. Which Reid? I can't remember which Reid is which. Anyway, the Netflix Reid, right? So no brilliant jerks on our team, right? We have, no matter how brilliant you are, no matter how good of an engineer you are, no matter how good you are at the technical aspect of your job, if you're a jerk to the people around you, you're going to be toxic to the culture, and you're going to be toxic to the performance of the organization overall. So, maybe let's just take a moment and then think through, and maybe we can just throw it out now. I want to keep us moving along a little bit. But I would like to hear is like, what are some recurring tensions you either have on your team currently, if you're on a team currently, or that you've seen in teams over the course of your career? What are some things that kind of just keep coming? Steve, I wonder if there's anything, how this shows up in Togo, and if you, like what you've experienced. And I'm always interested in sort of cross-cultural, like how things show up in different cultures. I think we're all the same on some level, but also, culturally things kind of show up differently. So you don't have to like necessarily speak to it. I'm curious about. And anybody can chime in. Just take yourself off mute. What are some recurring tensions on your team? What are those tensions maybe trying to signal? What do they say about you? And how do team habits kind of like reinforce or resist adaptability and change?
Well, personality. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no.
I was going to say personalities. If you're not careful how you build your team, you do need to have a diversity of personalities and other things, but at some point, everyone needs to have the same mindset, because they're all doing trying to get to the same place. And I think a lot of times there can be tension when different personalities are trying to get to the same place a different way.
Yeah.
Maybe a little esoteric with that.
Yeah. Actually, one thing I've been thinking about a lot as I'm starting, I'm in the process of founding a company. I'll be talking to you about it in just a moment, about what we're doing. But one of the things I want to think, I'm a big believer in diversity. I'm a big believer in like cognitive diversity, as well as, other kinds of diversity. And I think it makes things stronger. But I do think there's a baseline, right? There's you have to, and I'm trying to understand for myself, take my bias out of it, right? Because otherwise we just end up working with people who think like us. And I do like to work with people who think differently, but at the same time, there has to be some baseline of, collaboration. Again, the no jerks rule, maybe a bit more than.
Yeah, Bob, it goes back to your boat analogy, right? A boat's worthless without water, so they go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you've got a boat on the water and you have multiple people on the boat, if they're all on one side of the boat and one guy's on the other side of the boat, it's going to tip one direction, and that guy on the wrong side is going to be the odd man out, so to speak, or the whole system is gonna be capsized. So just kind of an analogy that I think of with regard to that.
Are you saying somebody was chiming in?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna speak to a bit of what Josh mentioned, like the multidisciplinary mixed with international with now, I guess, I don't even know what we call like human AI, multi living / non-living being, multi everything is like there's so much that needs to be done on the level of just understanding each other as humans and like where we're coming from. I remember like I come from a design background, but I always only worked with like tech and business people. So we never really spoke the same language. And it took me like 2 years in to understand that we were really just not talking about the same thing. But then when you start like drawing things like, stick figures and stuff, you realize that, yeah, we just need to have like those very simple tools that don't seem smart. And we need to start using those like silly things to connect as people sometimes in order to get to the space where you can then actually start having those more wholesome, deeper conversations. So the tools can be very simple and weird or go opposite to what you think you're trying to achieve sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. Have you ever read a book called Supercomputer? It just occurred to me. It's applying game design to organization design. It's a brilliant book. But one of the things that she talks about is that the way we think together sometimes has to do with what we're doing together, what we're doing with our bodies. And so often, so she did where a team was fighting with each other, there was a lot of tension. So she had them pick up the conference table and move out into the hallway together, and then move back into the room together, and then sit down and discuss it. And the idea was that we're kind of attuning our nervous systems at the same time. So these sort of simple, silly things. She's also a big advocate for like playing video games together. Like she would have people play a very simple, change the neurophysiology essentially in some ways, right? In order to make people work better together. Yeah, cool. Actually, I think that brings us to place to switch over to the sort of the individual level of activity, right? And so I also coach executives, and I've been coached myself. I've spent a lot of time in therapy myself over the years, kind of been on my own journey of self-discovery between, 18 years old and now that I'm 60, right? Like I've seen a lot, I've changed a lot over the years, and I've often found that the individual change of a key person can have a bigger impact on the entire behavior of an organization than just about anything else. Sometimes it's a relationship between two key people, as I mentioned before, but sometimes it's just one person beginning to shift their mindset. And so, the rules of thumb that I would bring to this is like, one, we need to have systems of support around ourselves. Like we need to kind of like be able to slow down in chaos and see things really clear. I used to work in daily newspapers, so I was on the desk on 9/11, right? I've seen a lot of chaos in these organizations when news is breaking, and you have to throw everything up in the air, and then you have to like slow down, not speed up. People watch The Pit. Have you seen the show The Pit? It's on HBO. Max. I love this show. I highly recommend it. It's each episode is an hour, and it's one day in an emergency room in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And they tried to make it as realistic as they possibly could, both in terms of medical procedure, also in terms of the way they organize. And I won't give away too much, but there is an event where they have to reorganize very, very quickly, bring all hands on deck. And it is incredible. It actually brought me to tears. But that's it because I'm an organization nerd. But anyway, but what I saw again is people like slowing down, running, rushing themselves. And I think that can be the hardest thing in these moments. Also, it can be really hard to trade. A lot of executives try to control everything as soon as things start to go, rather than getting curious about why things are happening and what needs to be listening to other people. So, again, we can cover this relatively quickly here. I'm just curious, when do you get triggered? What is the thing that like hits your button and you're like, I need to take a break. I need to step away. And do you practice? Like I like to collect practices for like recentering. I'm going to share one or two of mine with you. And then the last one, this question was asked to me a few years ago, and it was incredibly triggering to me, which was, who are the 5 people you spend the most time with on a regular basis? And the idea is, right, there's all that kind of coaching trope that we're somehow the subtotal of the 5 people we spend the most time with. But what I found is work as a consultant, I work as a trainer, that I'm often walking into environments where the people are new to me. And so the people that I spend the most time with is like my friend I brunch with every other week, right? So I don't have this sort of like steadiness I didn't at that time have this steadiness in my life. And I've really gone out of my way to make sure that there are people who I check in with, people who are in my corner, people who I can trust, who are not in my work world. I'm curious if any of you have it. So let's just take a minute, take yourself off. If anything, what did this stimulate for you? I'm just kind of curious, and you can answer any of the questions that I just.
I just think the last bullet you have about who you spend time with and thinking about that is, I think it's hard to be intentional about that, but you need to be. I think that I find that I have one person that I go running with, and we have like nothing in common except we live by each other and both have kids in the same school. And it's so refreshing to be like, I can't believe all this stuff is happening in AI. And he's like, what? You know what I mean? And then being like, oh yeah, like I am not surrounded by normal, right? Like my audience, the people I'm talking to are very different than everybody else. And I think as a product designer, like that's really helpful. But I think just in general in life, especially in the US, it's like highly segregated by beliefs and background. And so it's good to like force yourself into situations that are a little bit more full of people with different interests.
Yeah. Who else says something?
One thing that is really like interesting, I come from Finland originally, which is a very direct and kind of robotic culture in many ways. And I used to be very, just get to the point and get it done. And I found myself like reflecting on how relational I've become, because I live in cultures that are very relationship based. And I really struggle these days with like transactional relationships in general, even though fundamentally I should be used to it because of my cultural background. So it's interesting how these can fundamentally shift over time. It's like when you find what kind of works for you.
Yeah.
So it relates to like all of it. Is that we're not static, right? We just keep changing, and everyone else keeps changing. So it's like, how do you make the most out of those changes in a system that is complex and has a lot of people and a lot of changing variants?
Yeah. Yeah. I love actually from both of you, like the idea of like sort of like stepping out. A few years ago, I was doing work for Ford Motor Company, and I went to India to work with some of their technology teams. There was a time in my life when things were very exciting. It was moving very fast. I thought technology was moving very fast. I was right deep in the middle of it. And after that time, first I went and visited some old friends who live in Calcutta. And then after that, I went to Varanasi, where I actually randomly ran into good friends I had not seen in 20 years. I lived in Japan for a long time. And so I know a lot of travelers. And so I ended up like hanging in Varanasi with these people who were there on a buying trip. They bought crafts and they shipped to the US, they shipped it to Japan, and they sold it. That was how they made their living. And so we were going around to all these artisans. And all of a sudden I was like, these people don't know anything at all about what I'm talking about, but they seem so interesting and relaxed. Like it was just like really great for me to realize there are other ways of being in the world than the way I am being in the world right now. And there's a part of me that just sort of relaxed, and I came back, I think refreshed and actually better at my job. I didn't change jobs. I came back to my regular job, but it was revolutionary. Cool. All right. I put together a little set of resources here. I will share these slides with you, but these are some of my sort of like just favorite books in each area. Thinking in Systems, if you haven't read it, this is Donella Meadows' classic primer on systems thinking. She wrote it in 1979. It is still, one of the best things I have ever read. Radical Alignment, that's my last book. Maybe you'll like it. Maybe one I wrote with my wife, Alex Jameson, and it's really about helping people sort of align around from a relational perspective before they get ready to do something. So it's a technique that I use a lot when I do, large scale changes. And then Brave New Work is an old friend of mine, Aaron Dignan. My work is also in that book, but it's a really comprehensive collection and a catalog of all sorts of new ways of working and new ways of organizing. So I think from an organizational standpoint, these 3 books are pretty colleague, and this is her new book. I can't recommend it highly enough. Team Habits by Charlie Gilkey. Oh shit, also an old friend, which is really about, it's very similar, like what Brave New Work is to organizations, Team Habits is to teamwork, right? They're sort of like, collections of things you can do. Collaboration Explained is by Jean Tabeka, which is again, like a really a collection of tools and frameworks and things you might do. Jean was a mentor of mine, and unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But her book, I think, stands the test of time. And then from an individual perspective, you may or may not like these books, but I loved them. The Obstacle is the Way, where Ryan Holiday talks about what real stoicism is, not the, sort of cultural stoicism or what we think of when we say stoicism. His work is really good. Susan David is a psychologist who talks about emotional agility, and I got a ton out of this book. And then the book that really blew my mind, this is one of my favorite books that I read like 2 years ago, is Descartes' Error by a neuroscientist named Antonio Damasio, who goes very, very deep into the role that emotions play in cognition, and that the idea that you can be purely logical is actually not true at all. And and he goes into some deep research into, what happens when emotions are taken out of the equation, and it's not good, frankly. So he really just, I thought, helped me appreciate that we have to kind of embrace our emotions rather than kind of distance ourselves from them. I would say actually that's a through line for all three of these books. So if you let me know, has anybody read any of these books? Any favorites on the list? I'm always curious.
I like The Obstacle is the Way. Yeah, that got me more. I feel like stoicism is really like trendy, right? So it's nice to read that as a way to like, okay, what is this actually all coming from? So
yeah. Anybody else know any of these? Cool. All right. So I just want to wrap this up here and tell you a little bit about what we were doing. And I want to kind of let's go back to the org chart idea, right? As I was developing this, and this org chart is lying to you, that, kind of developing that idea, I had this sort of like sudden, like gut level realization that the stuff that I make also lies to people, right? So I've been a consultant for many years. I've done a lot of strategy decks, a lot of discovery decks. And these decks are also lies for very, very similar reasons, right? They're inaccurate because they're going to be out of date as soon as they're printed. There's going to be missing pieces because we only saw what we saw when we came into the organization. We're also editing them to make them readable, right? We're focusing, we're trying to tell a specific story, so they're going to be incomplete. And then they're misleading, right? Because, quite frankly, the incentives in the consulting business are set up for me to sell more consulting. And so I'm always going to like point at the problem that I can sell consulting to. And like I say, organizations are nonlinear systems. So sometimes a small change is all you need. But as a consultant, I'm incentivized to find the big change that I can charge for, right? And so we try to, I know a lot of great consultants. I try to be a good one myself, but at the end of the day, this is the reality. These are the incentives that are lined up. And so we're going to kind of, create things. And then, the last piece is kind of in the title here is shelfware, right? Like, is that what happens often to these decks is they just kind of get put away and never looked at again. So I've worked for many organizations, have paid me a lot of money to do what I think of as high quality analysis. And then at the end of the day, there's no organizational will to actually do anything with it. And it just sort of sits on a shelf. And to my mind, it may have given like one person one good idea somewhere along the way. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really drive the kind of change that we're trying to drive in the organization. So this is sort of the problem set that I'm kind of been coming into. So I've been asking myself, I left a full-time role where I was a managing director at a consulting company. I left it earlier this year. And at that time, I was like, okay, what's my next thing going to be? And the question I began asking myself over and over again is, how can I help leaders get clear and stay clear in these really chaotic times? And I also realized at that time that my love is for these mid-sized businesses rather than the enterprise. Enterprise is its own animal. I do love startup ecosystems and nonprofits. I've worked with all of these kinds of groups, but to me, it's the mid-sized businesses that are getting squeezed out essentially in the current environment we're in. And so the answer to this question for me is something that I call Splendid Torch. And you are actually, this is the first time I'm really talking about it in public, and next week as well. So we're in the process of launch. But what Splendid Torch is really at the end of the day is a group of people. It's a group of people that I really enjoy working with, and I really like. You see Bree here, who wrote one of the books that I recommended. Lisa Lewin is the former CEO of General Assembly. She's an old friend and a mentor. what I've done is I've gone to this group of people and I have asked them if they would be willing on some capacity to solve problems with. I'm prioritizing 3 different kinds of people. One is operators. I want people like Lisa, who has been, I have CEOs, I have COOs, and I have CHROs who are kind of like sitting on this team. I also have a lot. And now I'm into this a technology layer because I see this massive opportunity to apply AI to this problem set that I'm describing, right? So AI is kind of a forcing function in that it's disrupting the operating environment that we're in, but it also can become, as we all know, I think as we all appreciate in this room, kind of force multiplier, right? If we apply it in the right way, it can actually help us adapt. It can help us do better in this disrupted environment. And so what we've done is been working together and we've come up with a kind of signature offer, right? We'll work on large scale transformations just like any other group of consultants where we're very happy to, like if somebody wants to kind of reinvent their organization, we're happy to talk to them, or even reinvent a portion of their organization. But what we did is we kind of put our heads together and we realized that there is this sort of opportunity thing to do what we are already been doing, but do it a lot better and to incorporate AI into that process. So we come in, we do everything that we would always do, right? Observe operations, talk to people, gather data, and then do a lot of sense making, right? That's basically what consultants do. And then we produce 3 different things. One, we do this report, right? This potential shelfware that I've just been criticizing. You still got to do it, right? We produce a report, we do the best job we can with it. But then what we do is we take that and we put it into a live workshop where, we can digest what we've learned. We can pressure test it a little bit with the people that we're reporting to. And then most importantly, we can turn it into usually a 90-day plan. We find is like the best kind of, it's the most actionable thing. Like, what are we really going to do? What can we really do to address this? And so it at least takes that report and makes it actionable and then kicks things off. But then the next thing we're doing is we're taking everything we learned plus everything we know, like about our frameworks and our ways of working, and putting it into a leadership co-pilot AI. And basically, this is a tool that becomes kind of a living report. It kind of becomes a living, not even more than a slide deck, right? Because inevitably, right, what is it? No battle plan, survives, contact with the enemy or everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth, or whatever, right? That you're going to have to change. You're going to have to adapt. And so this AI tool is like, you can come back to it and you can think through it, right? And so again, we're just getting off the ground. I'm in the process of looking for like my first 5 clients. I actually don't want to charge for the Leadership Copilot AI for the first 5 clients because I want, because we're in our process of testing our assumptions and bringing things out. But we will, but we have to go through the whole scope in order to get there. So we're looking for, 5 mid-sized organizations that are willing to experiment with us. And in the meantime, I have built a tool called Ripple IQ. Ripple IQ is very much like this Leadership Copilot, but it's generic in that it does not have your organization's data in it. You can give, it's built on chip, so you can you can upload your own documents and you can talk to it and you can kind of give it a lot of context, a personal context. And what it has in it, though, is all of our frameworks, all of our ideas. It's got a really, really rich data set around organization design, around operations. I gave it recently to an old friend of mine who has agreed to actually, she's going to become an advisor to us. And she's a head of global people development for international fashion brand. And she just sent me this, the other day where she just said, there's something really powerful about being able to explore thoughts in a safe, protected, judgment-free zone and walk away with reflection. And so I think this is something, and maybe we have 2 minutes left, I apologize, but maybe in the, I'm just curious, like, I think AI is such a powerful tool for reflection, and I actually don't hear a lot of people, using it in exactly that way. So anyway, we'll be sending this out to you. I'm also kind of creating a special offer for it. We're actually really just launching this right now. So I need to work with Scott and we're
this is great. And Vinay,
organize a couple of things, but this is where
I was going to say, Vinay's in the chat and also lives down the road from you. So you guys should connect. But he's asking, are you asking them to potentially sell for you, or is this something you're asking them to buy, or what is kind of the actual ask here?
Well, so the offer is you can use Ripple IQ. We're going to be charging for it. I'm also, way as kind of my own loss leader to people that I talk to, the people I engage with. So we'll be giving you a certain amount of, see what and be able to share it with a couple of people if you like as well. And yes, this is a marketing, this is me, like bringing my marketing message. You've actually seen the inaugural voyage of my marketing message today. We're looking again for those sort of first initial customers. We always prefer always, like we're we do, many people who are out there in the market looking around for us and acting as our agents. Of course, if you work for a company, which I don't think anybody here does, but if you work for a company that may use our services, we're more than happy to discuss.
I would just say, Bob, like, I love what you said about using AI to think and strategize and reflect. When I work with companies on integrating AI, I tell them if they only have an hour, the way they should use AI is as a strategy partner, because it takes no technical ability. You can throw out the results if they're junk. It's just another viewpoint that you might not get, or it might just test your thinking. And even just saying, what is the weakest part of this argument or memo or letter or whatever, and like just getting somebody to say, did you think about this, is not hard and incredibly impactful, actually. So it's shocking how few people actually use AI as a sounding board, I think. So that's really good. So yeah, I'll open it up if anyone has other questions. We're going to post this on the blog. So if you go to chip.ai/blog, I would recommend subscribing there so you can see not only the follow-up, but also other events. And one thing we love with our gold partners like Bob is getting them to collaborate. So you saw Carl Linné on his website. I got to connect Bob and Carl Linné through Gold Partnership. So we love doing that. So if any of you want to join as Gold Partners or work with one another, that's kind of why we gather this group. So if there's any final questions, I'll get out of the way. Otherwise, I know we're right at time too. So Bob, best way to follow up with you if they want, is it rippleiq.com or just reach out?
Bob at bobgower.com is my email. I probably should have put this.
There it is.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm what is it called? And I jumped off the cliff and I'm building the wings as I fall right now. So there's a lot on my plate.
Oh, no, that's amazing. Anything you need, Bob, in terms of people to help you build stuff, people to technical things?
The three kinds of people I'm interested in working with and talking to. And by the way, everything we're doing is freelance relationships, and I'm prioritizing people who have deep experience, which is very different from a lot of consulting companies who tend to prioritize hiring in junior people to deliver work. So we are tuning everything to, so I'm looking for operators, I'm looking for organization designers, and I am looking for people who have a unique take on AI and technology. Because actually, I didn't even bring it here. This sort of BHAG, the big ambitious goal, that like sits in the back, where I think we can actually fundamentally reinvent the way operations is run at relatively large, at scaled organizations using AI. And this is my first foray into it. So I'm looking for people who are curious about that space and want to reinvent it together, because we tend to be a kind of a geeky bunch, right? The people that care more about how you do things than what you do, right? And so I will take introductions from just about anybody right now. And of course, if you know someone who might need our services, that's ideal. That's the main thing. And also I'm looking for feedback. If anything hit you wrong, or if there's anything you particularly liked, I'm looking for what's resonant. Now we're just sort of testing out things. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we can have a New York meetup with you and Saron and Vinay, and then we'll have a meetup in South Carolina for a few folks like Josh and Bob and who else is coming? Vinay will be there too. So yeah, that'll be a great time to get together. So hope you can all reach out and connect. And thanks for sharing, Bob. Really fascinating to think about this in an organizational way, and glad to bring your expertise to this crowd. So thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be back in about 2 weeks with our next live session. You'll hear about that. And in the meantime, reach out to Maria if you want to join us as a gold partner, and keep on building. Excited to learn from you all as well. So have a great day wherever you may be.
Great. Thanks.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.